Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Which is the Moon. I'm your Monday hostess, Natalie. This week, we are introducing another new topic. This is something we have never ever discussed here on Which is the Moon, and we're excited to bring you these new topics this season. This week, we are talking about palmistry. A very complex and intricate form of divination. And palmistry is really a very incredibly vast topic that I could probably give workshops on for the next month. Today I'm going to talk just the basics, and I do mean the bare basics, and I have 8 pages front and back of notes. So, that being said, I want to delve a little bit into the background and a little bit in the history or the believed history of palmistry. Really, its origins are kind of unknown. Then I'm going to talk about the very basic things you need to start looking at palmistry as a form of divination. I'm going to discuss hand shapes, finger shapes and names, the major lines, and the major mounts in the palm. I'm going to do my best to include a link to a PDF that's got the basic drawings on there so that you have something to look at, but it may be useful to you to find a decent illustration and kind of follow along from there, okay? First of all, again, it's an extraordinarily vast topic. Ever since the Stone Age, there's been an interest in the hands. Our hands are unique to any other animal on the planet. Although other primates have similar hands, our hands tend to be far more refined than most other primates that are out there. Okay, so we have seen things from the Stone Age where they have cave paintings in France and so forth where there have been images of the hand, including lines from the palms and markings and so forth. Then you move into like the Greeks and the Romans and the ancient Egyptians. Some believe that palmistry has its origins in India and that it traveled out of India into Egypt and from Egypt into Greece and Rome and so on and so forth, and then spread through Europe by the gypsies. The church denounced palmistry as a witchcraft tool, basically, but the gypsies kind of worked this to their favor. If any of you are familiar with Sarah Delphi, she does she has a 2 CD set on palmistry, which is where I learned a lot of what I know. And if I can reach over and grab it without looking like an idiot, I'll try to reach over and grab it. Alright, this is the CD. She includes in the CD illustrations that may be useful to you. So I would really recommend that if you want something you can listen to, if reading is not your thing and a good book just isn't for you, then her CD may be a really good option because she offers a lot of information. Okay, but she talks about how the gypsies carried palm reading through Europe, but when the church denounced gypsies and palm reading as witchcraft and saying that it was from the devil, the gypsies kind of worked this to their favor, and this is where the term of crossing her palm with silver comes from. They believed that because silver was a metal sacred to the church and so on and so forth, because of, if you're not Christian, it won't make sense to you, but basically, Jesus was betrayed for like 11 pieces of silver, I think, or 7 pieces of silver. So silver is considered something that is holy and sacred, which is why they say you can use silver bullets to kill a werewolf. Okay, but in any case, the gypsies then said that if you crossed their palm with silver, you know, it would protect you from the evil aspects of palm reading. So anyway, there are various different styles of palm reading, and in the East, their style of reading is different. There's a lot more focus on the thumb as a finger individually, and I'll go into a little bit more on that. But styles vary from palm reader to palm reader, as well as to region and area and focus and so on and so forth. Here in the West, we put our focus on the fingers and the up palm. Now, it's important that when you read palms, I'm sorry if I'm looking down, I'm referring to my notes because I want to make sure I don't leave anything out. It is very important that when you begin reading palms that you look at both palms. Now, you want to ask the person what their dominant hand is. If they tell you, oh, I'm ambidextrous, what I like to do is put a piece of paper and a pen neutrally in front of them and say, write your name for me. Whatever hand they reach for that pen with and write their name with, that would be their dominant hand that I would read as the doing hand, as I like to call it. Basically, the idea is that if you're right-handed, then your left hand is what you were given at birth, and your characteristics that are imbued in you, and your dominant hand is the hand, what you're doing with it. So this is the reason that we read this. Now, it's important to note that your palms change over time. The lines on your hands change over time. So the reading you get today may not be the same as it is a year from now, 2 years from now, 10 years from now. Lines form and they go away, they change, they deepen, etc., etc. So, you want to look at both palms and kind of consider both in order to get a general idea. It's important to note that life experiences will definitely have an effect on the palms themselves. So I'm going to cover the very, 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 very basics of palm reading. I'm going to talk about palm shape, finger shape, the mounds. Actually, I'm just going to cover the top mounds and the mound of Venus, and the major lines. I'm not going to talk about the marriage lines or the family lines or the children lines or the intuition lines or any of that in this video, because if I did that, it would take forever. Okay, palm shapes. When you're looking at the palms, well, first of all, you want to look at the backs of the hands and the fronts of the hands. If the hands have a lot of pores, especially on the back, very large open pores, that is considered a coarse hand. A coarse hand is significant of a person who is kind of open, very caring, likes people, sensitive nature. They're very open in their personality. If their hand is very refined, then they tend to be a little more sensitive in their nature in terms of to themselves. They tend to be a little bit more reserved and less out there with their emotions. When you are considering palm shape, there are 7 major palm shapes. Those shapes are square, spatulate, conical, psychic, and elementary. I'm missing something. Let's see. Square, spatulate, conic. Square, spatulate, conic, psychic, elementary, practical, and mixed. Okay, so that's what I'm getting. Okay, I'm going to start with square and talk about the square shape. When you're looking at the palm shape, look at both palms. Ignore the fingers and thumb. Look strictly at this part of the hand here. You'll see some that are very square, kind of in shape. I mean, they all kind of have a square shape just because of the hand, but you'll start to see differences, and it's very difficult to distinguish the differences in the palm shapes when you're first starting out, so don't be frustrated. Look at a lot of palms and just kind of take an interest. I mean, you don't have to read everybody's palm, but just kind of, notice people's hands and take a look at the differences in the shapes, and you'll start to see some difference in the shapes. People with a very square palm tend to be just exactly the way you would imagine them. They tend to be very practical, very hardworking. They don't like to deal with change. They tend to be very careful with their money. They're very down-to-earth, reasonable, hardworking people, not overly sensitive to other people, and they sometimes have difficulty expressing their emotions. People with a spatulate hand, that's a hand that's a little bit wider out. These are your people that are your go-getters. They're your doers. They're the ones that get out there and get their hands into everything. They're the ones that are restless, and they always need something new to get their attention, and they're always interested in something new and doing something new, and they have a hard time. I'm sorry, the dog is moving the daggum table. He's asleep underneath it, and he's ramming into it with his butt, so I'm sorry if the camera's moving. But they are very self-reliant, they're very restless, they're very impulsive, they need to be doing something, they're inventive and creative people, but they make really good entrepreneurs, but they don't always click well with a lot of people. Now, if they have a short hand with this tends to be kind of short and broad, and their fingers tend to kind of fan out a little bit, like if their hand's on the table, their fingers are going to kind of fan out. And that's kind of what you can see about that. They're very inventive people. Then you have a conical shape, which is more rounded to the top. than your spatulate or your square hand. People with a conic shaped hand have a tapered palm with longer fingers. They are creative. They have a lot of creative ability. They're very lively people. They're very imaginative people. They have a really good imagination. They're very emotional and tend to be very romantic. You see that shape on women typically more than men, but that doesn't mean that a man can't have a conical shaped hand. They are people who are impulsive. They may have trouble with making a commitment and sticking to it or seeing the job through. And they have a real difficult time finishing what they start. You know, they tend to get interested in something, work on it, and then have to go off and do something else. God forbid there sound like I was describing myself. Although I actually like to finish what I'm working on. I don't like to be interrupted, but I'll be reading like 4 different books at a time. It's kind of crazy. Anyway, the next hand shape is a psychic shaped hand. This is typically not seen in the Western world a lot, according to Sarah Delphi. You see it more in the particularly the Far East. But a psychic shaped hand has many lines. They have long tapered fingers. They are similar to a conic shape, and they have it's everything you would expect it to be by the name. They tend to have a high intuition. They tend to be very sensitive to other people. They're very idealistic. They have a really difficult time dealing with the realities of life and the world the way it is. And they tend to be very, very prone to beauty. They have a strong aesthetic sense, and they like to have a lot of pretty things around them. Okay. Now, the next shape is an elementary shape. An elementary shape is a little bit different from a square shape in that it is square, but it has shorter fingers and a shorter thumb. There are fewer lines in their hand, and they tend to be a lot like the square shaped hand in terms of they're very grounded, they're very practical people. They don't like a lot of change. They have an appreciation for a simple and predictable life, and that's the way they like it. They try to get by with the minimal amount of effort that they can. I want to take a moment to note here that a person with a square hand tends to have very square fingers. So sometimes if you're having difficulty distinguishing between the shapes of the hands, that combined with the shape of the finger can kind of give you a little bit more emphasis. So if you're kind of thinking that maybe they have an elementary shaped hand, but they have, kind of medium length and more squared fingers, then it's probably a square hand and not so much an elementary. If they have shorter, broader fingers and thumb that is very square, then they very likely have an elementary hand. These are people who have a really difficult time. The elementary hand people have a very difficult time expressing their emotions, and this actually frustrates them because they can't get themselves across to people, and so they tend to become very frustrated and are easily irritated in relationship situations, especially high emotional situations. Then the next shaped hand is a practical shaped hand. Practical shaped hands are similar to elementary shaped palm, but they have a degree of squareness to them with longer fingers. So they are interested in everything. These are the people that take an interest in the world around them as a whole, and they may have many interests and many hobbies, many activities. They like to learn new things and do new things. They are not afraid of hard work. They'll get out there and do what they've got to do, and they can do just about anything that they put their hand to, so to speak. So those are people that are good friends to have too. They tend to be very loyal. Now, people with a mixed hand, if you see people that have different characteristics, they might look kind of conical, yet their total palm is kind of square, so you're not real sure. They've got kind of mixed characteristics of the different palms. Then when you come across something like that, then you want to take more notice of the fingers and rely on some of the other features that you see in the hand, particularly the fingers, in order to get more information about the nature of this person. Now, when you're looking at the palms, it's very important also to note the color of the palm. If you see, this can actually be an indicator of health issues. We know that a lot of health issues show up in places before they're noticed globally a lot of the symptoms. For example, when you go get an eye exam, a lot of times the eye doctor can tell if you are diabetic before your physician has told you that you are diabetic, because they can see it in the eyes. It's the same with the hands. You want to look for the coloration. If you see a lot of red marks or red lines, especially if they cross other major lines in the palm, then that could be a sign that there may be a health issue, whether chronic or acute. Acute means it's happening right now and it's kind of short term. Chronic means something that's more long-term and more serious. So, if you notice a lot of that, you may want to tell them, hey, when was the last time you got a physical? That may be something that you want to look at. Alrighty, moving right along. I talked a little bit about the coarse and the fine hands. That's dealing with the pores. People with the open pores, especially in the back of the hand, tend to be a little bit easier to please. They're limited needs. They don't need a whole lot. They're kind of easygoing, easy to shop for, that sort of thing. People with refined hands are a little more sensitive in nature. They tend to like balance and a lot of beauty around them. Now I want to go into talking about the fingers themselves. Now, when we talk about the fingers are named after planets. And I'm going to cut away the thumb for just a minute. We're going to talk just about the 4 fingers. The fingers are, the index finger is Jupiter. The middle finger, I'm not going to put that one up by itself. The middle finger is your Saturn finger. Then you have the Apollo finger, and the little finger is the Mercury finger. Okay, we're going to start with the Jupiter finger. The Jupiter finger is the finger that deals with energy, your ambition, your confidence, your, attitude in general and nature. Your Saturn finger deals with your common sense, your balance, and your sense of duty. The Apollo finger deals with creativity, beauty, and your ability to express yourself to the outside world and to others, okay? Your self-expression, the way that you present yourself. The Mercury finger deals with communication overall, how we communicate interpersonally with other people. And it deals with also your sexual energy is housed in the Mercury finger. So activity in general, and particularly sexual activity. Now, as with the palms, hello, I'm having a moment, sorry. As with the palms, the fingers have different shapes. So the thumb, I'm just going to kind of set aside for a second. We're going to talk about the thumb all on its own. Now, you want to look at the fingers and take note whether the fingers are long, short, or medium. People with long fingers, they tend to be very detail-oriented. They're very patient. They're very interested in your intellectual pursuits. So literature, politics, things like that. They tend to be very cerebral and cerebral in their humor. They'll be your people with a dry sense of humor. They're workaholics. They're very serious people, and they take life very seriously. People with shorter fingers like to do a lot of things at one time. They're those people that are kind of scattered. They're always on the go, and they're very impatient. They're very impulsive. Patience is not a virtue with these people. People with middle fingers, fingers that are kind of somewhere in between. They're not real short. They're not really long. They're kind of in the middle somewhere, are people who tend to be a little bit more flighty, a little bit more, I don't want to say unstable, because that has a negative connotation, but they're the kind of people that they get interested in something, they learn what they can about, and they move on to the next thing. They're very flitty. They don't stick with something for very long. They're kind of impatient. It's strange, because they will be, if it's something that they're very interested in, then they'll be very, focused on it and patient with it and seem to stick with it, and then all of a sudden they're off to something new. So that's what you see. When you are considering the fingers, you want to consider how the fingers join to the palm. If they join straight across in kind of a straight line, then they're very practical. They're very, no nonsense, just the facts, ma'am, kind of people. If they form in an arch across the palm, then these are people that are your very intelligent, highly intelligent, very quick-witted kind of people. They have multitudes of interests, and they like to pursue a lot of different things. They'll take an interest in a lot of different things. These are your documentary type people. If it slopes from the Jupiter finger down to the Mercury finger, almost like you would picture a musical scale, those are people that tend to be more musical and artistic and have a musical talent in that regard. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit now about your thumb. Okay, the thumb deals with your ego, your overall energy and levels, and your strength. Okay, if you have a really long middle finger, and how do you know if your thumb is really long? Well, join it up on the other hand and see how far up does it come. If you have a really long thumb, people with a long thumb, it comes to the middle of the Jupiter finger or higher, and you want to put base to base. So I guess I can have a long thumb. These people are really kind of your strong people, very powerful, a lot of energy. They can do a lot of things at once. They're very ambitious. They're very much a goal setter and a goal getter. If they set their intention, they're going to make that happen. If they have a goal, then they will do. People with a short thumb that comes below the middle point of the Jupiter finger, and the way you can tell is you want to take the thumb of the opposite hand, take the base of the flange, and meet it up to the base of the flange of the Jupiter finger. If it comes up, longer than halfway, then it's long. If it comes below the halfway point, then it's short. Middle will be somewhere kind of in the middle. So if it's reaching way up, then you have a long thumb. If it's reaching down low, you got a short thumb. People with a short thumb, it'll come only to the base. They tend to lack a lot of confidence and willpower. These are people who are followers, not leaders. In opposite to the people with the long thumb. People with the long thumb are your natural leaders. They come in, they take control, they take charge. That's it. It's a done deal. You might as well just, yes sir, or ma'am. People with a short thumb are the opposite. They tend to not be able to make decisions very readily. They tend to lack a lot of confidence in their own skill and ability. They're not your leaders. They don't like being in a leadership position, and they don't do well there. They are just your average every day, whatever you say. They're the ones that when you say lead, follow, or get out of the way, they get out of the way, or they follow. People with a middle thumb, they're kind of somewhere in the middle. They can take a leadership role, but they're not necessarily the first one to jump out there and take the lead on something. They are very able. They like fairness. They have a good sense of balance and justice, and they're like your peacekeepers of the group. They kind of try to balance the two sides so that the person in control isn't getting frustrated with the person who can't make up their mind. These are your balance people. They like that. So kind of like the Libras of the thumb world. So now you want to take a look at how does the thumb join to the hand, okay? It joins to the mount of Venus right here. The mount of Venus is this mount right here. We're going to talk about that in a minute, but right now I'm looking just at this point. Where does it meet? Does it meet high up? Is it high set in the hand or low set in the hand? Okay, this people with a low set thumb, ideally, it'll kind of curve out and away. If you can set that sucker at a right angle, people that can set their thumb at a low angle are said to have at a right angle, are said to have a low set thumb. People with a low set thumb tend to be more confident. They're very generous in nature. They tend to have a flexible attitude. They'll kind of consider other points of view and can bend themselves to the people that are around them. They can kind of see other people's viewpoints. People with a very high set thumb, and you kind of look at it, if it's set up here in the middle of the palm and they can't really stretch it away from the hand, then they're not very flexible. They're kind of set in their ways. They tend to be very narrow-minded and have a narrow world view. They can be selfish and kind of focused on themselves. Okay. Now, if they are low set, now remember what I said a few minutes ago about look for balancing characteristics. Okay, this is one of those times you want to look for a balancing characteristic. If they have a low set thumb and they have a long lifeline, then that can sometimes indicate a person who's able to make a good balance between work and life. Okay. Same thing. If you see somebody with a high set thumb, but they have like other characteristics that show a generous nature, then it could be that person has learned to balance those characteristics in themselves. Okay. When you talk about fingers, I do want to mention that there are phalanges. The thumb has 2 phalanges, and the fingers have 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, that the length of the phalanges can give you more information, and the lines that you see on them can give you some more information. I'm not going to go into that here. We'd be here forever. This video is already 24 minutes long, and I'm still going. I'm only on page 5 of the notes, folks. Okay, so major lines in the hand. 4 major lines. Remember that. You have the lifeline, the headlines down here, heart lines up top. Then you have the fate and destiny line, which runs up through the center of the palm. Now, I'm going to look at my notes here, so bear with me because I scribbled super tiny, as you can see. These are all my notes. Okay, I'm going to talk about the headline first. The headline is the runs from, let me see, between the thumb and the base of Jupiter, running horizontally away from the lifeline. So starts right here and goes zoop, moving away from the lifeline, which ideally kind of comes out from the mount of Venus. You don't want to hug in the mount of Venus. Ideally, it kind of arches out. I'll talk about that in a minute. So this is your headline right here. That's that bottom line of the 2 on the palm here. Okay, and it starts here and moves out and away. Okay, the other one runs the opposite direction, just so you know. Okay, now your headline runs between the thumb and the base of Jupiter. Of the Jupiter finger. It runs horizontally away from the lifeline. It signifies your mental ability, intelligence, attitude towards life, mental health, emotional traumas, headaches, head traumas, things like that are often seen in the headline. But as the name would indicate, it deals with all those things that deal with the head and the intellect and the mind, as well as the physical head. So if they've had some sort of trauma, that may appear within the hand. If their headline slopes kind of down, then these are people who tend to be a little bit more spiritual in their nature. They tend to appreciate beauty and art and consider spirituality important. People whose headline runs kind of straight across the palm and doesn't have that slight arc tend to be a little bit more practical with kind of no imagination. They have a hard time projecting themselves into someone else's shoes and seeing someone else's perspective, and they tend to be very, very grounded people. So they can be good for that. You know, a lot of times when somebody else is kind of worried about something, they tend to be a little bit more practical and common sense about things. Now, if it starts as a fine line that parallels the lifeline, which is this line that runs along the Mount of Venus, then that could indicate that there is sorry, I'm mixing up my notes here. That's the hard line. If there is a fork at the end of the headline, that's what I wanted to get to, then that's called a writer's fork. And that usually indicates that the person has excellent writing skills and may take some sort of job in writing or that sort of thing. Now, the heart line runs above the headline. It starts below the Mercury finger and runs up and often curves up. Okay? Now, it usually terminates somewhere between the Saturn and the Jupiter fingers, so right in here. And this line, let me see what I have on my notes here about that one. If it ends or terminates below the index finger, so below the Jupiter finger, these people tend to be very romantic. Hopeless romantics. They tend to be very idealistic and emotional, highly, highly emotional, sometimes a little too emotional in a situation. If it appears as a short, fine line, if you notice a short, fine line right below it that parallels the lifeline, then that could indicate a long-term relationship within the person's life. See, there's like a little fine line right here that kind of parallels it. Mine goes up. I have a short, fine line here. And I have been married for 24 and a half years, although I could kill the man sometimes in his sleep. We won't go there. But if it terminates under the Mercury finger, which is this finger here, then these people tend to be can't even read my own handwriting. If under the Mercury finger, or finishing between the Saturn and Jupiter finger, it tends to be sensitive and have an ability, physical health, and ideal. The ideal is that it curves up, and that indicates a balanced and open nature. If it runs straight across, then that's a person who tends to want to hide their emotions. So ideally, this line should kind of curve, and if it does, then that kind of indicates a person who knows how to be open and can express themselves effectively. If it's just straight across, these are people that like to hide their emotions and hide what they're really thinking about people. And it says here, what did I write down about this? If it ends between the first and the second finger, then that's very balanced. They tend to be very generous, and so on and so forth. Now, I did make a note here. If it terminates under the middle finger, then that tends to be a person who lets their emotions rule their mind. They don't, or is that the opposite? No, their head. Sorry, their head rules their heart. So if the line terminates under this finger here, then this is a person who tends to be very practical about their relationships. They can be emotionally connected, but they can turn that off like that too. They let their mind rule what they think and how they feel. They don't let their emotions get the best of them. So that's what it is. And that makes sense, because if you think about the Saturn finger, Saturn being very, Saturny, then of course it would make sense that that would be the case. So if that line kind of doesn't swoop up and terminate between these two people, these two fingers, and it terminates kind of under here or under here somewhere, they tend to be people who are very practical and not overly emotional. Now I want to talk a little bit about the lifeline. That's this line right here that starts here, kind of terminates down here at the wrist. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about this is that a lot of people will ask you, how long am I going to live? Do I have a long lifeline? A long lifeline is not necessarily an indicator of a long life, because other people's actions affect us, okay? A long lifeline, it would be very irresponsible of you to look at them and go, oh yeah, you're going to live to be 105. We don't really have that ability just from looking at the palms. We can see other things, and other things manifest themselves, but it would be very irresponsible, and I would highly recommend against making any kind of a prediction on the length or blessedness of somebody's life. Okay, now you can tell what kind of life they're living and have lived based on the hands a lot easier. And that's not to say that there aren't things you can see, but usually what's happened in the hands is more of looking into the past than it is looking into the future. That this just gives you a basic idea of the nature of their life and what has shaped them as a human being now. Now, ideally, as I said, the lifeline will arc out from the Mount of Venus, and that indicates an independent nature, someone who's able to stand on their own and kind of make their own decisions. If it arcs really far out, then they're very independent. Clearly, the further out. If it kind of hugs in tight, like right here on that Mount of Venus, then they are people who tend to be a lot less independent and rely on others to make decisions for them. Now, if this is one of the lines that changes the most on people, so that would be one to really pay attention. And just to mention, all the little lines you see here extending out from the thumb towards the lifeline, these are called the worry lines. I'm not going to discuss them in detail right now, just know what that is. And if they actually make it to the lifeline and cross, then that person's probably dealing with some great deal of difficulty, or has dealt with some great deal of difficulty in their lifeline. Generally, rule of thumb is for years is you take the point between the Jupiter and Saturn finger, and you kind of draw a line down, and where it meets the lifeline, that would indicate the first 35 years of life, so on and so forth. But don't give that as a prediction for how long their life is going to be. Okay, that just kind of gives you a general idea on when events may have occurred in their life that have affected them. Now, the fate and destiny line is this line that runs from the wrist up towards the fingers. Okay, it's that second line. I do have a fate and destiny line. It's this line right here. This is the fate and destiny line, and it starts at the wrist, runs towards the fingers. Not everyone has this line. So people that don't have a fate and destiny line, what does that mean for them? Well, it doesn't necessarily mean anything specific. It could just mean that that person has a very varied and interesting life, that they've done a lot of things or will experience a lot of things in their lifetime, and so on and so forth. There are those, according to Sarah Delphi, or Delphi, I say it Delphi, but whatever. According to her, there is a train of thought in the community that those who lack a fate and destiny line are the kind of people who may be prone to overindulging in things, specifically things such as drink, drugs, and even criminal pursuits. So maybe those are the people who like to risk and take high risks. They're high risk takers, and they may do gambling, that sort of thing. So that could be one way to interpret that. But it is almost at the middle of the palm, starts at the wrist, travels towards the finger, usually ending at the base of the Saturn finger, but it could terminate somewhere else. And if it is attached to the lifeline at the bottom, if the two lines start together here, then that could indicate that they had strong family influences in their childhood. But if it ends clear of the lifeline, if it begins clear of the lifeline, then they more than likely had more of an independent childhood. It could indicate that their parents were the kind of parents that allowed them to explore various different interests and pursuits and be a little bit more independent, so that they probably have learned what's an appropriate risk to take and what's not, and the natural consequences thereof. So it could be that, they're very independent. The further away the line is from the lifeline, the more independent that they are. Now, you will see that I have some lines that cross through my palms here, and I have a cross here, and I have a cross here. I'm not going to get into what crosses, grills, dots, and chains mean at this point. That would take forever. We're now up to 37 minutes. Okay. If it begins very, very close to the wrist, right on the wrist, then it could be that that person has known from an early age what they want their career to be. The funny thing about that is, I don't know if you'll be able to see it in here, but my fate and destiny line starts like right here, actually, kind of on the base of my wrist. And I knew at the age of 7 that I wanted to work with the hard of hearing and the verbally impaired. I'm a speech language pathologist. It's kind of funny. I thought that was very amusing. So let's see. If it ends under the Jupiter finger, this finger here, so if that line travels up, curves, and ends under the Jupiter finger, these are people who are highly interested in philosophy, the law, political science, etc., etc. If it ends under the Saturn finger, which is the most common, then these are people who followed kind of a conventional path in life. They've done what they were told was expected of them societally in life. They went to college, got a degree, worked in a corporate, maybe started their own business, but basically they've followed a very practical and common sort of lifestyle. Now, if it ends under the Apollo finger, this is indicative of a person with a very creative nature who may be a little bit more into the arts and artistic pursuits, music, etc., etc. If it terminates under the Mercury finger, since that is the finger of communication, then these are people who very likely have taken kind of a public speaking or, teaching type of pathway in lifetime. Not necessarily, so don't take that just as, but that's kind of where their interest and pursuits tend to lead them. So if it terminates in 3 little branches, that's actually a very lucky sign, and they'll be very fine little branches. They'll kind of terminate out like the mouth of a snake, and that indicates that this person has found an appropriate balance between work and life. that they have learned a way to kind of balance all of their different interests and pursuits, and can live their life with a degree of contentment and happiness. So I'm not going to talk about the marriage lines, the children lines, the intuition line, or any of that right now. What I am going to go into, and the last thing I'm going to talk about, are the basic mounts. There are 4 below the fingers, and then, of course, the mount of Venus. Sorry. Was I calling that the mount of Jupiter? I was calling that the mount of Jupiter, wasn't I? It's the mount of Venus. I'm so sorry. You have the mount of Venus and the mount of the lunar mount. So I'm not going to talk about the lunar mount. Can't believe I was calling that the mount of Venus. I mean, the mount of Jupiter. It's the mount of Venus. I'm thinking Jupiter because the Jupiter finger. The mount of Jupiter actually is right here. It is where the Jupiter finger attaches to the hand. Now, you want to look and see, is it rounded? Is it flat? Does it invert? Some people's mounds aren't mounds. They actually invert, and we call that valleys. But they carry the same meaning, whether it's a mound or a valley. The Jupiter mount will ideally be wide and firm in nature. This indicates qualities of intelligence and confidence. These are the people who will succeed. They will do whatever it takes to succeed within reason, and they definitely, once they set a goal, you just might as well figure that that goal is going to be met. If it's very dominant, if it tends to be extremely dominant, very rounded, then these people can be domineering and overbearing. So you don't want it too large. If it's very soft and kind of squishy, it's not very firm, these are people who tend to overindulge and be kind of greedy and selfish, very arrogant. They're quite proud of themselves, and they're very good at that. If it is very flat, there's not a lot of mound to it, then those are people, or even inverted, those are people who tend to be very inverted in nature. They lack a lot of self-confidence. They may have social anxiety. They don't really have a lot of respect for themselves, and they don't really have a lot of ambition in life. The Saturn mount is right here where the Saturn finger attaches to the hand, and this mount is often the most prominent in most people's hands. Okay, that's a good way to put it. It tends to be the more predominant of the mounts in the hand. If it is indented, then that person may lack self-control. If it's well formed, then that tends to indicate somebody who is very self-disciplined, serious, very responsible. They have a good sense of their duty. Remember, this is the finger of duty. So they have a good sense of duty, and they do what's expected of them. They're able to kind of fulfill their things. They may be indifferent sometimes to the emotional sides of things, and they kind of prefer to work alone because they figure they can get the job done better than they can in a group. Now, I'm sorry, it's usually the least dominant. Okay, now the Apollo, now if it's flat, it tends to be the least dominant. I'm sorry, I think I said it's the most dominant. This tends to be the most dominant. This is the least dominant. Okay, I'm getting confusing myself. I told you this is a super complicated topic. That's why I had to make notes. There's a lot of information. Anyway, this tends to be the least dominant mount. Most dominant, least dominant. Now, if this is flat, then typically the mount of Saturn, if it's flat, they tend to not have a lot of the negative qualities that are associated with this, like being just duty-driven, etc., etc., etc. The mount of Apollo, again, this deals with our sense of self-expression and creativity and beauty. So if this is well developed, then this person will have an artistic flair. They're going to be the kind of person that loves beauty and appreciates simple, beautiful things in life. They have a strong aesthetic sense, and they love that. And again, remember, this deals a lot with like musical creativity too. So if they have good communication skills, they tend to be very clever with money. They may even be entrepreneurs, but they can have a very quick temper and turn on you like a pit bull. That's an unfair analogy. I don't mean to slight the pit bulls, because pit bulls can be good, but just know that they can turn on you very quickly if you're not careful. Now, if it is flat, then then the opposite would apply almost. These people tend to be people who are lacking imagination. They don't really get a sense of the aesthetic. They don't really appreciate beauty and art and all of that stuff. And they're very practical in nature. Going on to the Mercury finger, this deals with your communication, personal skills, and sexual energy. So if it is well formed, then they kind of take an interest in everything around them. They have a humor, a quick humor. They tend to be competitive with strong communication skills. They tend to be easygoing. They make good partners. They're able to really infuse a lot of passion in everything that they do, and they take an interest in everything around them. If it tends to be very flat right here, then these are people that are kind of impractical. They have difficulty finishing a task. They're not going to be super connected in terms of emotionally. They will find it difficult to engage in long-term type activities and relationships and so forth. Okay, now, the Mount of Venus. Okay, I think I've called it the Mount of Jupiter all freaking video. The Mount of Venus is right here. This is the mount that is the most predominant on the hand itself, especially on the palm. You have the lunar mount and you have the Mount of Venus. Now, the Mount of Venus, as you would expect from the name, deals with your emotions, your passions, your emotional life. Ideally, it's kind of firm and raised. If that would be indicative of a person who has a lot of affection to give. Now, I don't know what in the world it means, the fact that I'm double jointed and can stick my thumb out like that, but I'm just kind of curious if that has any special meaning. I haven't been able to find anything in any books or anywhere, but, I can flex that sucker out. But it should be ideally firm, raised, indicating affection, passion, energy, an enthusiasm for life, an ability to be kind and to be empathetic to others, okay? If it is very flat, these are going to be people that have a real hard time maintaining a strong, passionate relationship with somebody. They may be passionate at the start and it burns out quick. They may just lack passion altogether. They just are kind of like doing what they can to get through because they just don't want to be alone kind of thing. They don't connect well emotionally. They have difficulty expressing their emotions, and they're just kind of there. They're your wet noodles. All right. So, again, Mount of Venus. Jupiter Mount, Saturn Mount, Apollo Mount, Mercury Mount. Fingers, the names apply. Jupiter, Saturn, Apollo, Mercury. Okay. You got your thumb. High, low, set. Take a look at the hands as a whole. Consider the shape. Consider how the fingers attach. Consider the lines. You have your head line, heart line, lifeline, fate and destiny line. Not everybody has. So those are some things to look at. Remember that you want to look at both hands to kind of get a better picture of the nature of the person and the life that they have led. Dominant hand being what they're doing with what they've been given. Their non-dominant hand, what they were given at birth. So just kind of keep that in mind and really look at the balancing factors that there are. There is so much more to be covered. There are loops. There are minor mounts, lines, phalanges, worry lines, travel lines, intuition lines, your children lines, grills, dots, loops, numbers, crosses. You'll see all kinds of things in the hands. Sometimes you will even see the person's birth sign in the hand. You may see numbers that indicate something that happened at a specific time, but that would be far too much to go into at this point in time. I would just say get yourself some really good books. Check out this woman's CD, because I'm telling you, her Secrets of Palmistry, you'll learn a lot. She covers a lot, but she talks fast, so take your notes. Do a lot of reading and start branching out and checking it out for yourself, because it is difficult to do, but once you get kind of a generalized idea, it gets easier and easier the more hands that you look at. I know you've seen the charts. Like I said, I'm going to try to link I'll put a link into a PDF in here so that you can pull it up and kind of look at it. But definitely check it out. And I hope that I didn't totally confuse you by calling this the Mount of Jupiter the entire time. It's the Mount of Venus. I'm sorry about that. My coffee's kicking in. The phone's ringing. People are calling. My daughter woke me up at 4:30 this morning with a tragedy going on in her life. So I'm But in any case, I hope that you should see the worry lines on my hands. But anyway, I hope that you all enjoyed this video. I hope that it wasn't too monotonous and boring. I hope that I provided you with a lot of good information to get out there and start looking at some palms and getting into this really unique and exciting form of divination. Thank you so much, and blessed be.